Hi students, welcome to another session of Film Studies. We are now at Module 3, Unit 4, and we have been looking at some of the basic ideas of national cinema. We were looking at cinema's ideology. We were trying to understand nationalism and transnationalism. We were trying to look at Indian diaspora. And I hope you have watched those films and read those texts, and you have more questions and you have more, you're more confused than before. That's how it should be ideally. So let's move on to Unit 4. So today we are going to look at some of the contemporary trends in Indian cinema. This is actually one of my favorite sessions. So what do you mean by contemporary trends in Indian cinema? I'm trying to look at some of the genres. So basically, I'm trying to explore some of the trending genres right now. You have already studied genres and everything. So some of the trending genres right now, and how do you sort of place them within the idea of national cinema? Do you think it has a role to play? So if you look at Indian cinema, you will see how it has evolved over time, as I mentioned earlier, and how closely it was connected to the nation building process. How it sort of reflected at any point in time the developments in the country, the kind of things that interested the people at any point, the concerns that people had, the hopes that people had, the aspirations that people had. So, and some of the major crises that we have gone through as a nation. We'll see all of them reflected in cinema, as I've mentioned earlier about how, if you look at the wars that happened, China, Indo-China or Indo-Pakistan wars, and how it got reflected in the films as well. Or the way in which, modernity was depicted in cinema. How the fear of the future was depicted in cinema, how unemployment got reflected in cinema. I was talking about The Angry Young Man and corruption, right? So these are some of the things that we saw over a period of time. There has been, very clear, responses to social changes in India at any point in time. The kind of responses, the cinematic responses that we have always had, or even gender for that matter. If you look at feminism, if you look at the way in which women are portrayed, I don't have to say much. You are familiar with a film like The Great Indian Kitchen or a film like Jai 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 Hai. The way it reflects the shifting paradigms when it comes to gender identities, when it comes to empowerment of women and so on. So when you look at contemporary trends in Indian cinema, it also means the contemporary trends in the discursive practices of Indian society. What are the things that are of interest to Indian society right now? How are they responding to social changes right now? One just needs to take a look at the cinema that is being produced and consumed, and you will see what is happening in the society as well. So let's take a look at the contemporary trends. I have identified certain genres that I think will tell you a lot about Indian society. How is something that you will have to find out later, but some of the trends that I saw was that the importance of historicals and biopics. So in this session, I'm going to look at historicals and biopics and the ideological dimensions of these films. I will also look at crime thrillers because that is another interesting genre. So basically, I'm trying to look at these three genres which are extremely popular right now in Indian society. So let's take a look at historical cinema. Can you think of any historical films right now? When I talk about historicals, which are the films that come to your mind? One of the films would probably be Padmavat. Now, you would have noticed how some of those films are not really very successful in recent times, but they were extremely successful some time back. Or, films that talk about people who are probably still alive, like biopics. A biopic like Super 30 or a biopic like Padman, or films that claim to be based on true events. Films like The Kerala Story or The Kashmir Files. These are all films that probably fit in this genre, that claims to be a depiction of reality, that comes with the claim that this is real, this is fact, claims to be facts. So let's take a look at historicals. Now, India has always had historicals, right? We have always had films that can be called historicals. So we had films like Pukar in 1939 or Sikandar in 1941. So these are all, historicals. Or Jhansi Ki Rani in 1952. Films which basically were historical films. And historicals, what they do is, usually in the earlier times, it was mostly costume dramas, and historicals gives you the possibility to create huge spectacles. That is one advantage. So cinema in itself is anyway something that captivates you, and if it is all about costume dramas, it is about these magnificent people and spectacular fights and everything, then when there's a lot of color and glamour and music, then it becomes all the more interesting, all the more captivating. So historical cinema always had an advantage in that sense. So it has always played a role in national cinemas, in the emergence of national cinemas. It has played a role in sort of gathering more, sort of seeking more support from people for certain nationalist agendas. It could have been to fight in the war for independence, or much later it could have been for some other goal. So it is a way in which you mobilize the past. Now, how you're going to use it is another matter altogether. So historicals tries to mobilize the past for some kind of goal, some kind of agenda if you have one, especially in the context of national cinema. So after some time, after the independence and all of that, the films that came out, mostly historical films, mostly either had a romantic story which was draped in history, or mythical stories that were woven around history. So something like Anarkali in 1953, because Anarkali is a fictional character, or Mughal-e-Azam in 1960. So these are films which were romantic dramas. So there was a lot of fictional elements added into these films. Or in 2005, like something like Mangal Pandey, when Ketan Mehta came out with romantic subplots. So there's a lot of love stories that go along with these historical dramas. So or maybe in 2001 we had something like Ashoka. It was, although these films always claimed, it claims to be historicals, but they do have characters, they do have stories which are not really historically verified. So there will be characters, there will be elements, there will be sometimes the whole story itself might, there'll be some extra story added to it to sort of embellish the historical story. So there'll be a historical dimension to it, but everything else would be sort of fictional. So romanticizing history seems very innocent. So it adds a little more of cinematic dimension to it. It makes the story, the narrative a little more interesting. But when you start historicizing myths, then it becomes problematic. Now, when you try to look at contemporary historicals, you realize that there is a lot of such historicizing of myths. So, a story like Padmavat, one knows that it is quite a fictional account. There is no actual historical records of a character like Padmavat. And then you historicize this myth. Now, as you historicize a myth, you also sort of start setting an agenda. Now, this is where the problem lies. So, then it becomes a kind of propaganda. So, it is very much easy to create a historical with a propaganda in mind. So, when you look at a film like Padmavat, again, I'm using the same example. There is a lot of historical inaccuracy in the film. Although it claims to be a historical, although it claims to be factual, there is a lot of inaccuracy. Inaccuracy being, sort of stemming from the fact that the character itself is fictitious, it is not real. There are no historical accounts that talk about the character being alive during this time or being there. Also, the fact that you create an other. The other is a Muslim other who wears clothes which you cannot historically verify, who acts like a demon. So there is an absolute demonization of this character. So the way in which you create those binaries, so in a postmodern world, we talk about heterogeneity, we talk about identities not being fixed, identities being in a state of in a state of flux or in constantly in process. We sort of fix certain identities in these films. So historicals thereby become propaganda machines and try to sort of circulate a kind of propaganda which is very damaging for the nation as such. So these historicals, so how do you look at these historicals as national cinema? What is the kind of ideology that it is trying to propagate? The ideology itself becomes very divisive, very hate-filled. Now, take a look at any other historical that came out recently. I'm not talking about Padmavat, but you can look at any other historicals. Every other historical will talk about some kind of agenda setting. And the fact that most of these historicals are not properly verified as history. I do want to mention a historical that came out very recently, The Trial of Chicago 7. That's a film that you might probably want to watch as a historical. It's a kind of, so we do find a lot of films trying to redefine history. So there have been a lot, especially in the West or in India, there have been a lot of injustices done to a lot of communities over a time. There has always been this question of othering, marginalizing, the subaltern. So such rereadings of history is very interesting. So there is a retelling of the narrative, trying to set some mistakes right. The black community that found themselves to be subaltern, to be the subaltern or to be marginalized in the US or in other parts of the Europe. So there's a lot of rereading or redefining of history from their perspective. So that's an interesting take on history, in fact. Do we have any historicals in recent times that try to tell stories from this other perspective? It's an interesting question. Maybe you would want to ask. You can probably take a look at films that were released recently and try to understand if there has been any historicals that were released in recent times which try to look at history in a different way. Try to probably look at it from the perspective of the subaltern. So historicals in recent times is also very interesting perspective because from the point of view that the technological growth in which the technological growth that has helped production practices, the use of technology to create historicals in such a way that it looks fantastic. The spectacle is so amazing that one wants to believe in it. So when you want to create a war scene or something of that kind, you can make them so magnificent with the technology that is available to us right now. So moving on from historicals to biopics. Now, biopics is another very problematic subgenre of historicals. And we have a lot of biopics right now. I do remember reading about Rocketry, which is a biopic on Nambi Narayan, and one of his colleagues saying that the film is not authentic, saying that in a place like the space station, you cannot work on your own. You need a community. You work together. Interesting accusation, because the word authentic is extremely important when you talk about biopics. So biopics are usually a subgenre of historicals where we depict or take the life of a person and try to depict it in a cinematic narrative. So it is about a person who has lived, who is probably still living and has made a change in society. So in India, right now we have a lot of biopics. Now, why is it so important? Because the fact that it is authentic. The claim to authenticity makes this subgenre extremely interesting, especially from the national cinema perspective. Now, remember the film Sanju. It is supposed to be a biopic, and there were a lot of accusations against the film, saying that the film is not authentic. And this is about a person who's still alive, and everybody has read about his life. So it was very clear that there was some kind of selective, authenticity. That a lot of things were hidden, a lot of things were not mentioned while the film was produced. Now, biopic is a category of films which claims to be authentic, which claims to be true. Now, the question arises, how many of these films are actually authentic? Are they really authentic? Are they really telling you the truth? Are these people really such heroes? Now, the claim makes the film problematic. Right? And sometimes you also see, when it's a war movie, you also see at the end of it the actual characters. They show you pictures of the actual characters to just confirm this authenticity. Now, if they are not authentic and the film is telling you some kind of ideology, or it is trying to tell you some kind of an ideological premise, then it becomes problematic. Most of the biopics now in German, Nazi Germany, films were considered to be the ideal vehicles of propaganda. And they used such films, especially historical films and all that, to sort of establish their hegemony. They even used expressionism, techniques like expressionism to sort of establish their authority clearly. I remember reading about those films which had a young girl climbing up the hill, to a bright new sunrise, a new day, sort of establishing how Nazi thought or Nazi ideology is going to fix all problems in Germany. So this kind of, these are ways in which cinema can be so powerful in sort of establishing certain ideology as the best for the country at any point in time. So cinema then becomes a vehicle. So biopics are, again, as I mentioned earlier, are a very powerful vehicle. So take a look at a film like Super 30. Now, the film did go into a lot of trouble because of the way in which Hrithik Roshan was used to portray this character called Anand Kumar. Now, Anand Kumar is from northern India, who is slightly of darker complexion, and Hrithik Roshan had to use a makeup to look slightly dark. Now, this was not the real issue in that film, because the film was later, there was a lot of controversy around the authenticity of the film. Now, biopics are also sort of clearly telling you what it is to live in a neoliberal era. It tells you success stories of people who have established themselves through their own merit. It is a very clear example of how neoliberalism works, although it is not really 100% true. So the dominant ideologies, whatever it is, sometimes it is that of neoliberalism, sometimes it is that of patriarchy, and the dominant ideology always tries to establish itself through these films. So biopics and historicals, both genres, you could call biopic a subgenre of historicals, both these kinds of films try to tell you what national cinema, what is the direction that national cinema is taking in India right now. So again, there, as I mentioned earlier about the othering, now the way in which certain characters are portrayed, as I mentioned earlier, or the way in which certain situations are portrayed, and it is interesting how even language is mentioned in these films, about this whole focus on local regional languages and completely sort of ridiculing the use of a common language like English. Actually, you will find that in Padman and in Super 30. So take a look at these biopics once again. Watch them again. If you have already watched them, watch them again. Try to understand the nuanced ways in which this kind of an identity is established. What is the role that these films play in shaping the sensibility of a nation? Take a look again and you will understand how important, how powerful they are. Another interesting genre right now is crime thrillers. Now, crime thrillers also play a significant role in sort of understanding or the sensibilities. So, what do? They are the perfect distraction techniques in a way. Are you someone who likes to watch a lot of crime thrillers? What do? How do they impact you? How does it become part of the national discourse, the nationalist discourse? You might want to read about it more. Do go and read the list of articles that I've shared. Also watch the movies. I hope you have had a better understanding. I hope you have got at least some idea about how these contemporary trends are a reflection of the way in which our national sensibilities are evolving right now. Thank you.